BXB. It's in the game!
So, normally when Ben sends me a point-and-click adventure game to review, he's doing so as basically an act of thinly concealed revenge, often because I said something unkind about him and his fine Steam keys during the intro to the last point-and-click game I reviewed. And so this whole passive-aggressive cycle has continued, and so it seems it will always be, until my inevitable death through brain hemorrhage, blood running down onto my mouse as I scream incoherently about unhelpful failure messages and bad inventory systems. But Herald is a bit different. You see, Herald has been reviewed quite positively. The Guardian gave it some serious love, the Steam reviews are genuinely glowing, and it's won a bunch of awards at various indie shows. This could well be a point-and-click game we'd be reviewing even if Ben wasn't trying to commit a devious murder by point-and-click overdose. So okay, now that I've finished baiting my friend, let's talk about Herald. Herald is a much more modern point-and-click than many that I've played in the last year. We are squarely in that telltale territory here, with your job as a player mostly being just to walk to the places you're supposed to be and make dialogue choices, some of which will influence the direction of the narrative in the future. You take the role of Devon, a young fellow with a somewhat hazy past and slightly unclear motivations, who finds himself working aboard a British cargo ship, the Herald. The game possibly eases you in a bit too gently at the start, and the first hour or so is really quite slow as the main characters on board all line up to introduce themselves and quickly make their main personality traits known. Now then, that's a bit unfair what I've just done there, and it sort of illustrates a problem I'm going to talk about. In some ways, I find purely narrative-driven games quite challenging when it comes to making a fair evaluation of them. I find it very hard to not stare at the structural rigging and the scaffolds that are put up in place to hold the story together, and so the temptation when reviewing a game like this is to mostly spend my time pointing out the various techniques the designers have used to try and support the narrative. Similarly, when it comes to a branching story, I can't stop myself from looking for the branching points and seeing the bottlenecks that the writers will inevitably need to build into the story to stop the entire game from just collapsing under the weight of the player's agency. In a way, it's a kind of illness, and it hurts my ability to really enjoy this kind of game. But all that said, the best writing in other mediums can avoid these problems for me pretty readily, but I have to say game writing still has a long way to go to match the quality of work you will find in cinema and in TV, and Herald is a really good illustration of this. The writing here is really good for a game, and what that means is it wouldn't come close to cutting the mustard in any other medium. As you progress through the story that unfurls itself before you, the creaking and groaning of the boards and ropes of the ship are kind of joined by the creaking and groaning of the wooden characterizations, the obvious branching points, and the eternal problem of a main character who, in order to allow the player to be able to make these changes to their approach at any moment, comes across as a disjointed, nebulous, incoherent cipher. I know that's a harsh criticism to level because, as I said, this is perfectly acceptable writing for a video game. Better than many I've recently played, to be fair, but because of the sort of game this is, the writing is really all there is to it, and what's here just doesn't really grab my attention. To explain why in any real detail would necessitate an unwanted voyage into the choppy waters of the great spoiler ocean, so I have to be deliberately vague here. But at the dramatic conclusion of the first chapter, I was left mostly just confused. So confused, in fact, that I immediately played that chapter through a second time, searching for exactly what it was I'd missed that would explain the final events of the story, and even on my second attempt I still drew a blank. Along the way I also realised that, perhaps unsurprisingly, the range of player agency on offer here is, just like in those Telltale games, a complete illusion. You really have quite minimal influence over what happens, and when you know where the story is headed and start deliberately trying to steer it off that course, you really start to feel the rails that are driving the story forward, and you see how constrained you are on your path to the inevitable conclusion. Albeit there's minor differences that you've programmed in earlier via the occasional branching choice you've made, but these are very cosmetic. The main thrust of the narrative here cannot be changed. Now, this is a harsh review, almost certainly. I'm sure there's still a market for games like this. I'm sure there are Telltale fans out there who don't mind that they have only limited agency and enjoy the ride, and those people would enjoy this game thoroughly. I also have to say the production values are pretty jaw-dropping for an indie game. In particular, there's something being done with these 2D portraits that appear during dialogue that I have never seen before and is genuinely amazing. The way they move, these are the most 3D 2D portraits I've ever seen. Now in truth, I suspect these very high production values are why this game has had such a positive response from critics. Sadly, either because of my limitations or the limitations of the writing in this product, I can't really add any more words to all that enthusiasm. For me, the Herald is worth nothing more than 2 stars.
BXB. It's in the game.